This training will cover revisions to the Hazardous Communication Standard and the new Global Harmonization System. This training will take approximately 18 minutes to complete and another 5 to complete the online competency. Please ensure you have enough time to complete both, and thank you very much for your time. You might ask, why are we doing this training? In March of 2012, OSHA published the first major revision to the Hazardous Communication Standard since its inception. It incorporates the Global Harmonization System, allowing transition from your right to know to your right to understand. Your right to understand the chemicals you use and how to use them safely. The Global Harmonization System was developed by the United Nations. And what does the United Nations have to do with the Hazardous Communication Standard? We all use chemicals at work that could potentially be hazardous to our health. These products and chemicals are shipped around the world. The manufacturers were not required to design their product labels or safety data sheets in a uniform way. This makes it difficult for employees to find the information they need quickly and easily. Additionally, language barriers could make this information less useful to the employee. The United Nations worked to develop the Global Harmonization System to address this safety issue. The Global Harmonization System sets a standard format for both SDSs, safety data sheets, and shipping labels. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, requires that this training be completed by December 1st, 2013. The manufacturers, importers, distributors don't need to convert to the new safety data sheet format until June 1st, 2015, and the shipping labels don't need to be converted until December 1st, 2015. Let's take a look at the features of the Global Harmonization System and how they can help you better understand the products and chemicals you use in a safer way. Under the Global Harmonization System, each product or chemical will have a label and an SDS that clearly states the product name, the code number and batch number of that product or chemical. The label and SDS or safety data sheet must have the manufacturer, importer, or distributor's name, address, and phone number. The label and safety data sheet will now have pictograms that are universal and communicate specific information about hazards or safety issues related to that product. The product label and safety data sheet may have a signal word. The word danger indicates a more severe hazard, while the word warning indicates a less severe hazard. Labels and SDSs will now include hazard statements. Hazard statements describe the nature of the hazard for the product or chemical, including, when appropriate, the degree of the hazard. The hazard statement for a specific chemical will now always be the same for that chemical, no matter who manufactures the chemical. For example, bleach, no matter who manufactures it, will have the same hazard statements. Precautionary statements are on the label and SDS. They describe recommended steps that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects that are caused by exposure to a hazardous chemical or improper storage or handling. Material safety data sheets will no longer be called MSDSs, but SDS, safety data sheets. Under GHS, SDSs now have a standardized format. Let's take a look at them.
You have probably seen an MSDS book in at least one of your work areas, or know how to access this information electronically. Manufacturers, importers, and distributors must supply accurate, complete, and up-to-date MSDSs to each of their customers for any hazardous chemicals they supply. This applies to chemicals in portable containers as well as bulk chemicals. But the format and organization of each supplier's MSDS has been pretty much up to them. Under the GHS, These reference documents will now be called simply Safety Data Sheets, or SDSs. SDSs are arranged in a very specific order with specific headings for each of 16 sections. Every section must be listed in the SDS, in order, even if there is no available information on that topic. The first section will always be Identification. This section shows the unique product identifier. The product identifier on the SDS must exactly match the product identifier on the shipping label and in the HazComm plan. This is how you use the label to lead you to the correct SDS and also to that particular chemical in the HazComm plan. Under the GHS, this section also lists the recommended use of the product and any restrictions on its use. The second section is Hazards Identification. Under the GHS, much of the information that was listed in this section in MSDSs has been moved to other sections in SDSs. This section now contains the signal word, hazard statements, pictograms, and precautionary statements, as seen on the label. The SDS may also carry additional hazard information and precautionary statements that do not appear on the label. This section lists any of the 16 possible physical hazards. Physical hazards are those that cause harm by a physical effect from outside the body, such as an explosion, a fire, or a violent chemical reaction. Flammables, corrosives, and pressurized gases are the most common hazardous chemicals that pose a physical hazard. This section also identifies any of the 10 possible health hazards. Health hazards are those that cause harm from inside the body, like a poison or attacking a specific organ. The most common health hazards are acute toxics, corrosives, and chemicals that harm the skin, eyes, or lungs. Under the GHS, this section may also list other hazards, including simple asphyxiant, combustible dust, pyrophoric gas, or a hazard not included in any of the other categories. The pictograms that appear on the label correspond to these hazards. For example, the flame pictogram means the chemical can catch fire by any number of methods, such as from a spark or heat, or by self-reaction, or that it could emit a flammable gas. The star in chest pictogram could mean that if the chemical entered the body, it could damage certain organs or cause cancer. When reading this section of an SDS, you may see hazard categories listed. These categories can be numbers and/or letters. For example, an extremely flammable liquid is hazard category 1, while a liquid that is only combustible, that is, it must be heated to a much higher temperature in order to burn, is hazard category 4. Now there's a tricky part here. Be aware that the numbered hazard categories under the GHS are the opposite of the numbering system used by the HMIS and NFPA labels. Recall that HMIS and NFPA workplace labels use a 0 to 4 rating system, with 4 being extreme hazard and 0 being minimal hazard. Under the GHS, 4 is the least severe hazard category, and 1 is the most severe. You must pay really close attention to the source when you see one of these hazard ranking numbers. The third section of the SDS will have composition information on ingredients. For mixtures, all hazardous components present at 1% or greater will be listed here. All carcinogens will be listed if present at 1/10 of 1% or greater. Then comes first aid measures. This section contains the recommended first aid measures to provide to persons who have been exposed, such as what to do if someone gets it on their skin or in their eyes. New under GHS, this section now lists the most important symptoms that may result from exposure. Next is the firefighting measures section. Under the GHS format, this section also identifies any special protective equipment or precautions needed by firefighters. The sixth section has accidental release measures. This section is for persons responding to an uncontrolled release, an emergency response situation. This section has directions and the materials needed for safe containment and cleanup of the spill, often showing different procedures for small and large spills. Then, handling and storage. This section is unchanged under GHS and still describes the precautions and conditions needed for safely handling and storing the chemical. Exposure controls and personal protection lists occupational exposure limits, appropriate engineering controls, and PPE to be used for normal work activities involving the material. Note that this is usually different from the precautions associated with uncontrolled releases that were listed in the section on accidental release measures. The next section is the physical and chemical properties. The 10th section has stability and reactivity. This section continues to list the conditions to avoid, such as static discharges, shock, or mixing with substances that are incompatible and could cause an explosion or release of toxic gases. GHS SDSs now list the reactivity of the chemical also. Then, toxicological information. Under GHS, this section is where you will find the possible routes of exposure. The next section is ecological information, how spills of this chemical can damage the environment. Then, disposal considerations. SDSs will describe how to dispose of residues and contaminated chemicals properly and in accordance with applicable environmental regulations. Next is transportation information. Then, regulatory information. The 16th and last section contains other information, including the date the sheet was published. If you find an old SDS, the supplier should be contacted about updates. With all SDSs, you will see all this information in exactly this order.
Remember, SDS sheets, shipping labels, and pictograms will not be fully implemented until 2015. Let's take a few minutes to go through those pictograms and see what they mean.
So let's begin our GHS training with the pictograms. These are standard symbols enclosed within a red diamond border, and there are 8 different ones for the physical and health hazards of chemicals. A skull and bones pictogram is used for acutely toxic chemicals, those with oral LD50 values less than or equal to 300 milligrams per kg. For chemicals having oral LD50 values in the range from 300 to 2,000 milligrams per kg, a pictogram with an exclamation point is used. Different signal words and hazard statements will be associated with these pictograms on the labels and on the SDS to further distinguish the hazard level or the rank within that hazard category. Here are the pictograms, what they stand for, and an example for each. An exploding bomb pictogram is used for explosives or self-reactive substances. You should not have any chemicals requiring this pictogram on your school science shelves. A flame pictogram is used for flammable or pyrophoric materials, or those that will generate a flammable gas upon reaction with water, for instance. Examples of flammable materials requiring this pictogram are any of the alcohols, ethyl and methyl isopropyl alcohol, etc., acetone, and also sodium and potassium metal. The third pictogram has an O underneath that flame. That stands for an oxidizer. An oxidizer is anything that adds oxygen to a flame. Familiar oxidizers are, of course, ammonium nitrate, potassium iodate. The fourth pictogram is a gas cylinder, and this is self-explanatory for gases that are under pressure. An example, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on. The corrosion pictogram is used for both physical and health hazards. It's used for anything that is corrosive to metals or, more importantly perhaps, that will cause skin corrosion, skin burns, and permanent eye damage. An example of a chemical that requires the corrosion pictogram: hydrochloric acid, acetic acid, ammonium hydroxide, and so on. A skull and crossbones pictogram is used for those substances that are acutely toxic, that is, fatal or toxic if swallowed. An example would be phosphoric acid. The exclamation point pictogram is used for any substance that would be classified as an irritant, either a skin and eye irritant or a respiratory tract irritant. It's also used for skin sensitizers, allergens, and those that have toxicity values classified as harmful if swallowed. An example of a chemical requiring the exclamation point is iron 3 nitrate. Finally, the health hazard pictogram is used for any substance that would be classified as either a known or a possible or a probable carcinogen, things that have mutagenic properties, are reproductive hazards, or have specific target organ toxicity. Examples of chemicals with the health hazard pictogram: all chromium-6 compounds are known carcinogens, lead compounds, methylene chloride.
To review, we are required by OSHA to do this training now. In 2015, manufacturers, importers, or distributors of products and chemicals are required to use the new format for safety data sheets and labels. As part of GHS, both the safety data sheet and the product label need to have specific information. This includes a product identifier, what the product is, and its identification number. A signal word of danger or warning may be included in the SDS and product label. Universal pictograms are included on the SDS and product label. Hazard statements informing you of the dangers of the product are listed on the label and the SDS. Precautionary statements letting you know how to stay safe are listed on the SDS and label. The name of the manufacturer, importer, or distributor, their address and phone number are listed on the SDS and label. The Safety Committee will be working over the next year to prepare for 2015 and the full implementation of the global harmonization system. Now that you're done with this training, go back to your email, click on the link, and take the quiz. Thank you very much for your time.